Hello, students. Sorry, my computer's a little slow. I'm on the kind of editable version of week 6 of The Mind. I'm actually working on making some changes right now. I don't post a ton of lectures, but because I really believe in the fundamental idea that you should explore many of these ideas for yourself, and your ideas that you come up with are just as valuable as mine, so long as you're engaging deeply. And the more you share with our little community here, the better. And the more that you interact with each other, the better. Although sometimes that is really difficult with an online course. I want to challenge you to not give up, especially when you're reading this week's chapter on the mind from Patton and Cannon, our cartoon introduction to philosophy. Because despite the fact that this is a pretty accessible text in the graphic novel genre, this one is a challenge. So I just want to let you know that it's okay if you feel challenged. Don't be afraid, as I say here, to be confused. I have introduced some keywords this week that I really would like you to make yourself comfortable with. Some of them you might know, like Plato, right? We've already done Allegory of the Cave, so you're kind of familiar a little bit with some of Plato's ideas. We're going to talk about these other ideas just briefly. I'm not going to go into everything here because, quite frankly, we could talk about philosophy of the mind every day for 2 weeks straight, and we would still not be able to cover all of the aspects historically or how it impacts society today. But what I do want to bring up is we are going to, through our text, use some of the more historically significant ideas behind the philosophy of the mind. But I'm also going to share with you, and I'm not done sharing them yet here in this. You'll see them when you're in this week, but I'm not quite. I'm still picking the sources that I want to share with you. The reality is when we think of mind, I want you to answer this question. When I think of the mind, I think of, and if you said brain or body or something connected to that, you're with like probably 90% of the population in today's world and society that is going to connect the mind with the brain. But 60 years ago, even, that wasn't necessarily the case. So, historically, in the philosophy of the mind, when we're thinking about Leibniz, when we're thinking about Descartes, whom you're going to read about this week, they're not necessarily connecting the mind to the brain. Okay. So it's very interesting because when we think about this concept of dualism that you're going to read about, which means it's more like spirit and body than brain within the body, how we would think of the mind. And so as you approach this, just know that in today's world of philosophy, there are still quite a lot of people who are going to have different ideas about the philosophy of the mind and what they accept and what they think is true. And so you don't really need to have a firm grasp of what you think is true about the philosophy of the mind. Our overall goal is to learn about its history and its development. But I think it's worth noting that when we think about the mind and the body in a Cartesian sense, or something that Rene Descartes would explore, or even this guy named Leibniz, a German guy who came a bit later. Rene Descartes is a Frenchman. And so we're thinking about this all over the Western world, in the many moons ago, 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th century, this philosophy has developed. But we're thinking more about like that which animates the body, which would have been taken more. I mean, honestly, there would have been a more philosophical, theological perspective, maybe the concept of the soul, right? Instead of like the brain as the mind, whatever makes us human and makes us work. That is what we're talking about when we are talking about the philosophy of the mind. Now, in today's world, people would equate the mind more with the brain. And they would say that which animates us or makes us other, or makes us conscious, um, is the brain, right? So science tells us today that neuroscience tells us today that our brain is this really, really powerful organ, that can do just all sorts of tremendous things. And so, it's interesting because we as Christians, are people of faith. We're not really challenged. The idea of maybe a soul isn't super challenging to us. And we would see that maybe as something separate than the brain. But, in the world of science, not that, all scientists are atheists, because they're certainly not. Some of my friends who are the best scientists I know are really devoted Christians. But, a lot of people in today's world are going to assume that the idea of the soul doesn't exist, right? But we do have this incredible field, which we know more about than we did 60 years ago or 100 years ago or 200 years ago, which is neuroscience. And growing in our knowledge of how the brain does indeed, um, what it can do, its power, right? Its ability. And it is also worth exploring. So, as read through our text, know that in that in that text we are focusing a little bit more on like the historical side of the philosophy of the mind and consciousness, which is more like a soul concept. And then in task 2, I am going to put some helpful tools here that I think is better. You might want to choose just one or two that sound interesting to you, that do talk more about like neuroscience, and how either neuroscience has been impacted by the philosophy of the mind, how Christians should think about maybe neuroscience and the philosophy of the mind, or what ideas we should explore. The power of neuroscience today, and our growing knowledge of education and how we learn and our consciousness and things like that. And a few other tools I'll put under task 2. So you don't have to listen or watch all of them, but do know that under task 2, and maybe I'll even label this is more of like a neuroscience, a neuroscience section. Know that the way we think about, the brain and the mind today, oh, sorry, I misspelled it. The brain and the mind today is different than how we're looking at it from a historical, or even theological approach. So, lots to explore here. There is a lot to talk about. It can be a little overwhelming, but I think it's also lots of fun. So, have fun with it. If you have any questions, you want to talk about anything before you write your forum post, just let me know. But I'm really excited about this week, and excited for you to learn a little bit more. So reach out anytime if you have any questions, concerns, and I'll see you all soon. I am planning on doing our first discussion around this time, so perhaps we'll get to have a more in-depth discussion about the philosophy of the mind at that point. All right, have a great day and a great week, everybody. I hope it's going well.